Okay, guys. For reading today, I will be helping you read because you don't have this book. I wasn't able to give you this book yet. So we're going to do this with video lessons instead. And I'll give you your questions. I'll send them in an email and everything for whatever you need. And I'll even send some of the pages to find your answers in, along with emails and hard copies later. So we're reading from Trails to Explore. And today we're going to be reading pages 2 through 15. So please listen carefully. Like I said, I will try to send hard copies, but for now we're going to read this together. We Invent the Franklin Stove by Robert Lawson. During the hard winter of 1745, Amos the church mouse found shelter in the home of Ben Franklin. Here is part of Amos' story telling how he became Ben's closest friend and advisor. And if I do say it in great part possible for his success and fame, this story is from Ben and Me, an enjoyable book by the author of Rabbit Hill. I slept late the next morning. When I woke, my fur cap home was hanging on the bedpost, and I in it. Dr. Franklin was again crouched over the fire, attempting to write between fits of sneezing and glasses hunting. The fire was there. What there was of it was smoking, and the room was as cold as ever. Not wishing to be critical, I said, but perhaps a bit of wood on that smoky ember that you seem to consider a fire might— Waste not, want not, he said severely, and went on writing. Well, just suppose, I said, just suppose you spent 2 or 3 weeks in bed with pneumonia. Would that be a waste? Or— It would be, he said, putting on a log. Whatever your name might be. Amos, said I. And then there'd be doctor's bills. Bills, he said, shuddering, and put the 2 more logs quick. The fire blazed up then, and the room became a little better, but not much. Dr. Franklin, I said, the fireplace is all wrong. You might call me Ben, just plain Ben, said he. What's wrong with it? Well, for one thing, most of that heat goes up the chimney, and for another, you can't get around it. Now, outside our church, there used to be a hot chestnut man. Sometimes when business was rushing, he'd drop a chestnut. Pop was always on the lookout, and almost before it touched the ground, he'd have it in his sack and down to the vestry with it. There he'd put it in the middle of the floor, and we'd all gather around for the warmth. 28 of us it would heat, and the room as well. It was all because it was out in the open, not stuck in a hole in the wall like that fireplace. Amos, he interrupts, excited, there's an idea there. But we can't move the fire out into the middle of the room. We could if there was something to put it in, iron or something. But the smoke, he objected. Pipe, said I, and curled up for another nap. I didn't get it, though. Ben rushed off downstairs and came back with a great armful of junk, dumped it on the floor, and was off for more. No one could have slept, not even a dormouse. After a few trips, he had a big pile of things. There were scraps of iron, tin, and wire. There were a couple of old warming pans, an iron oven, 3 flattertrons, 6 pot lids, a wire bird cage, and an anvil. There were saws, hammers, pincers, files, drills, nails, screws, bolts, bricks, sand, and an old broken sword. He drew out a sort of plan and went to work. With the clatter he made, there was no chance of a nap. So I helped all I could, picking up the nuts and screws and tools that he dropped and his glasses. Ben was a fair terror for work. Once he was interested, it was almost noon before he stopped for a bit of rest. We looked over what had been done, and it didn't look so bad, considering. It was shaped much like a small fireplace set up on legs, with 2 iron doors in the front and a smoke pipe running from the back to the fireplace. He had taken the andirons out of the fireplace and boarded that up so he wouldn't lose any heat up the chimney. Ben walked around looking at it, proud as could be, but worried. "The floor," he said. "It's the floor that troubles me, Amos. With those short legs and that thin iron bottom, the heat." "Down on the dock," said I, "we used to hear the shipwrights telling how the sailors built their cooking fires on board ships. A layer of sand right on the deck, bricks on top of that. And Amos, he shouts, 'You've got it!' and rushed for the bricks and sand. He put a layer of sand in the bottom of the affair, the bricks on top of that, and then he set the entrance in. It looked pretty promising. 'Eureka!' he exclaims, stepping back to admire it and tripping over the saw. 'Straightening things up a bit, Amos, while I run and get some logs.' 'Don't try to run,' I said. 'And by the way, do you come through the pantry on the way up?' 'Why?' he asked. 'In some ways, Ben,' I said, 'you're fairly bright, but in others you're just plain dull. The joy of creating may be meat and drink to you, but as for me, a bit of cheese—' He was gone before I finished, but when he came back with the logs, he did have a fine slab of cheese and a loaf of rye bread. He put in some kindling and logs and lit her up. She drew fine, and Ben was so proud and excited that I had to be rather sharp with him before he would settle down to food. Even then, he was up every minute to admire it from a new angle. Before he finished even one sandwich, the room was warmed up like a summer afternoon. 'Amos,' he says, 'we've done it.' 'Thanks for the we,' I said. I'll remember it." Okay, let's go over some of our questions. Number 1 says, what character in this story is real and which one is imaginary? So, obviously, Ben Franklin is the real one. And little Amos the mouse obviously can't speak. So he'd be our little church mouse, is the imaginary one. What about 2? How could you tell that Ben was cold? What did he keep doing? He kept crouching over the fire, and he would, sneeze every time. And so the little mouse suggested, hey, you might want to put some wood on that fire so you don't get sick with doctor bills. Okay, number 3. Why would not putting more wood on the fire be wasteful? Well, I kind of talked about that. It would lead to sickness and what? Doctor bills. And that made him shudder, and he's like, okay. So he would keep putting on more logs. Where did a fire need to be if it was going to heat the entire room? So the little mouse suggested that his father used to do, get a chestnut and put it in the open, in the middle of the room, so it was out in the open. Who wanted to be given credit for inventing the stove? Now remember, he says, "Thanks for the we," I said, "I'll remember it." Amos, he's the one that wanted to get credit for the stove being invented. Okay, we're going to read Bobo next. So we're going to read this, and then I'm going to give you the questions at the end of the story for you to answer on your own. There'll be 4. Okay, let's get to reading. Bobo, Elizabeth Orton Jones. I first came upon Bobo one day when I was out walking on a country road. I was going slowly along, thinking of nothing in particular, when I happened to look down at my feet, and there, not 3 inches away, wasn't it lucky that I hadn't stepped on him, was a baby bird. He was a tiny thing and quite bare, except for a few pin feathers pricking through. His skin, which looked a few sizes too large for him, was all wrinkly and purplish. In fact, he was rather an ugly baby. Oh, I thought, he must be a baby blue jay. That's just what he must be. I had heard, of course, that the first thing you ought to do after finding a baby bird to the ground is to look for the nest from which he was fallen. So I looked up into the trees above and nearly turned a backward somersault, trying to see into the highest branches. I could see no nest at all. From where had he come? I looked at his ugly, funny little face. "Hello, Bobo," I said. His beak was very yellow and big. He opened it wide, and a loud squawk came out of him. A very loud squawk for such a baby. I held Bobo high up with my hands so that his parents might see him, should there be anywhere around. But if there were, they took no notice. I tried putting him up in the crotch of the tree, but he fell down again and flopped onto the over into the road. In the end, I decided to take him home with me. There seemed to be no two ways about it, so I made my hands into the shape of a little house for Bobo, and I started off down the road towards home. But oh, all of a sudden I thought of Petey. He is my cat, a very proud Persian. He has long silvery fur and a bright pink nose and large shiny green eyes. Of course he was only a kitten then, but just the same I'd heard tales of what kittens might do to little birds. So you may be sure I was very careful to keep them apart. At night I locked Petey out of my room, while I slept with Bobo beside me on the pillow, curled up against my neck to keep him warm. I was afraid of rolling over on him, and so used to keep waking up every once in a while to make sure he was still alive. But one morning I found that I had evidently been sleeping more soundly than usual. Bobo was safe and perfectly happy in his place beside my neck, but Petey was fast asleep on the other side of the pillow. The door, strangely enough, stood wide open. Well, just to see what would happen, I put Bobo next beside the sleeping Petey. With a yawn and a purr, Petey woke and began to lick Bobo. He gave him a good washing up his little breast and down his back. Then he put his pink nose up against Bobo's funny little wing. I dare say that this was his way of kissing Bobo. At any rate, Penny and Bobo became good friends. When Bobo was old enough to hop about, he used to pretend that Petey was a heel and would climb up on his back. And Petey used to pretend that Bobo was a ball and would roll him around with his paws, very gently, of course. Then when the heel and the ball felt tired of play, they would go to sleep together. After Bobo had grown some feathers, Petey used to wash them with his tongue very carefully every day, and Bobo, to return the kindness, would prune Petey's long tail with his beak. Bobo loved other kinds of baths, too. He had his own bathtub, of course, but if a cup of tea was left standing, Bobo was sure to take a bath in it, or a dish of soap, or a pitcher of cream, or a glass of ginger ale. All would be bathed in by Bobo at the first opportunity. He was really very naughty. I couldn't scold him because he loved to be scolded and would squawk with joy each time I began. I couldn't very well spank him because somehow it didn't seem quite right to spank a bird. If you've ever tried it, I dare say you found out what a brute it makes you feel. However, in the end, Bobo punished himself. One day I found him flopping about in a jar of honey. Oh, he was a sticky bird that day, and he had to be giving still another kind of bath, a very splashy one, under the faucet. And after that, he was a little more careful about what he bathed in. Day by day and week by week, Bobo grew larger until he had grown into quite a large bird. He had been an ugly baby, but as his bright feathers grew, he became more and more beautiful. He never had more than 2 or 3 feathers in his tail, to be sure, for Petey had a way of sitting on Bobo's tail just when he was about to fly away. But I thought it was beautiful, even without a full set of tail feathers. Little by little, Bobo learned how to fly, and when he was able to fly very well, then I knew that he was old enough to go into the woods and fend for himself. So very sadly, one day I walked far into the woods, carrying Bobo in my hands. I said goodbye to him and let him go. He flew up into the top of the tree. "Be happy, Bobo," I cried to him. Then very sadly I started back, and what do you think I saw when I got home? Petey was lying on the doorstep, sound asleep in the sun, and between his paws slept Bobo, looking as if nothing at all had happened. After that, of course, Bobo stayed with us. When he was very young, I used to feed him bread and milk, which I stuffed down his throat with the end of a match. Now he squawked and flapped his funny little wings that each bite went down. I soon learned that he expected a large dinner just about every hour, and I used to think how pleasant it would be the day when Bobo was old enough to feed himself. But that day never came. Even when he was a grown-up bird, do you think he ever caught a grasshopper for himself? Not he. He just sat squawking and flapping his wings over the place where a grasshopper was, and I had to catch the grasshopper for him. Bobo loved to go with me wherever I went. When he was a little bird, he used to hop along with me upstairs and downstairs and into the garden, and then after he knew how to fly, he used to go down to the village with me, flying along from tree to tree, squawking with joy to be with joy as he went. The end of summer came too soon, and the time to go back to the city. I knew that was something would have to be done about Bobo. The city was no place for a blue jay, so I gave him to a very kind man who loved birds. And for all I know, Bobo is living there still, probably taking baths in the kind man's teacup. Now these are your questions, 1 through 4. What things did the writer do to try to get the bird back to its parents? So what was the very first things he kind of did? How did Bobo learn his lesson not to bathe in any liquid he could find? So what happened that was like, oh, he's more cautious now? When did Bobo learn to feed himself? When did they say he learned to feed himself? Number 4, what was so unusual about Petey's relationship with Bobo? So what was the interesting thing about them that made them such interesting friends together? And I'll put it closer. So you'll just number 1 through 4, answer those questions, and I'll see you tomorrow.